What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Unfiltered Sessions podcast. I've got a great guest for us today. Her name is Rayna, and she is a podcast growth coach. So we're going to dive into life, business, but ultimately podcasting. And you've heard some of my story about how it's changed my life and helped me become a better speaker and more influential. But we're going to learn from the coach herself about just how important starting your own podcast is and how it can help you with your business. But welcome to the show, Rayna. So excited to have you here.
Thanks, Philip. I'm excited to be here too. I love talking to entrepreneurs, especially the journey and how people get there and their pathways. And probably most importantly, how do you fast forward that journey?
Yeah. Oh, that's going to be something good for us to talk about. So talk to us about you real quick. And what's your background? What got you into entrepreneurship? And then ultimately what led to doing the podcast coaching?
Yeah, great question. Like many entrepreneurs, I didn't start out as an entrepreneur. I wasn't really even anywhere in my wheelhouse. I'm actually a former teacher, high school, middle school, did a lot of international teaching, love that. But when COVID struck, I knew I was ready for something different. Like many women, I had small children at that time and there was no daycare. And I'd always been doing a lot of audio video projects with my upperclassmen. And I was like, you know what? I'm ready to do something different that gives me flexibility, gives me freedom in my lifestyle, and kind of uses some other talents that I had. So I dove into that space. I started being a podcast producer, a YouTube producer, did great, worked with a lot of women coaches, entrepreneurs, and I loved it. So I took a deep dive, did a lot of courses, spoke with a lot of experts, and then kind of worked my way up in that space. And I found pretty much starting about 2 years ago that a lot of people were still interested in getting into podcasting, but they were looking for someone who knew a lot about the industry and could help them grow their podcast or start to monetize it. So people were looking for a coach. And it was at that point that I talked to Adam Shively. He's my mentor from Podcasting Business School. And he started a podcast certification and took that. And it's been great. So I feel like coaching really is a natural extension of being a teacher anyway. It kind of, takes my love of podcasting, mixes it with teaching. I'm like, oh, this is perfect. It's a blend of all the things I love in one spot.
And so you're full time into the podcast coaching, correct? You're no longer a teacher?
Right. Yeah, I don't teach anymore. I stopped teaching in 2020. And yeah, just been running my business ever since. So it's been, I guess 5 years now at this point. And yeah, I feel like the first 3 years, like what everyone says, it's kind of a roller coaster of experimentation, right? And figuring things out and figuring out what really is your niche and how do you move forward and how many shiny objects do you need or not need, like trying everything out, letting a lot of things go, and then, figuring out what works best for you. And then you finally get that space where you're cruising along at the speed that you want.
Yeah, it's funny that 3-year mark seems to be a very significant spot. I feel like you finally get enough recognition. You've been doing it long enough. It's like, okay, maybe you're actually going to stick around for this. Under a year, it's like, you're not proven. There's so many factors that go into it. But the 3-year mark, I hear from so many entrepreneurs, that seems to be the spot where things change. Or I guess you realize, okay, this is not the path. And then you make a big pivot and everything. But it's also interesting. I feel like there's been a lot of teachers that after COVID, they decided to stop teaching. We saw, not just in the teaching space, but a lot of spaces where there were so many things just forced upon us and so many changes. And then we realized that this old way of doing things was really archaic at the end of the day, especially teaching. It's still cool. Obviously, a great transition for you to do teaching a different way. And I'm sure if it's not yet, it will be more lucrative than the teaching side for sure. And now you get to work with who you want to. And there's so many different things. I'm sure there are just huge benefits there. But talk to me real quick. I think this is an important point, especially for those that are early in their business journey. How did you really start getting that traction? Because especially in the coaching space, I guess depends on what you're doing, hard to show that transformation. And especially getting that first client or couple of clients, it's like, hey, I know I can coach on this, but you don't have that social proof or that credit and credibility behind you. So how did you build up that credibility enough to then it's just people start coming to you because they trust in you and they see that you're credible in that space?
Yeah, great question. It's kind of a two-part answer. So part one is after I'd been producing a podcast, I was like, I need to do my own podcast. So I started a podcast called You Betcha She Did. It's all about Midwest women entrepreneurs. And I started doing that for a couple of years, and it really helped build up a network of really neat women. And these are exactly the type of women I wanted to work with in my social circle. So I would say if you're an entrepreneur, how can you also practice what you preach? Like show that you're doing explaining it, because then you really dive deep into everything. So that's part of it. The other part too is, and I learned this from a coach of mine, a business coach I hired, really do market research. Like, call out people that you would be interested in working with, see if you can offer them, just pick their brain for 15 minutes, really dig into like, what is the problem that they want to solve, and see if you can find a way for you to solve that. You're not selling anything at that point. You're just really trying to figure out what is it that people want and what are those results that they want. And then from that, you start to design, packages or courses or programs that solve that problem. And from that, then I would say you'd want to do like a test group, like a beta group, and just say, okay, I want to charge this price, but I don't have those testimonials yet. I don't have dozens of clients under my belt. So let me start a beta group. Let me offer what I want to do, what I know people want at a discount, really over deliver, right? Show this transformation, get those testimonials. And then once you have those out into the world, not only does that word of mouth help, but anywhere where you're promoting yourself, social media, a podcast, blogs, newsletters, whatever, you pop those testimonials and you have that social proof, you have the results. And that's magic right there. I mean, that's what people are looking for. You always need that word of mouth, like, okay, this is legit. Like, it sounds good, but is it as good as it really seems? So I felt like that was really solid advice that helped move me forward, because yeah, it's hard to get people when you're like, well, I haven't been doing this for 20 years, but I know I can make a difference.
Such good advice there. So many things to break down. And for me as well, I started my virtual assistant agency back in September of last year. But before that, I was doing public speaking coaching, really trying to get that off the ground. And it just really was not going anywhere. And I had a couple friends reach out about the virtual assistant stuff and then wanted to pay me. And I was like, okay, this is actually starting to get some traction. But the big thing that I saw, actually having somebody on my podcast, I was literally just talking to them about, because after I started it, it was shortly after that, somebody else I had on my podcast, we were just talking. I'm like, yeah, my virtual assistant does this for me, not trying to pitch her, just like talking about it in general. She's like, that's exactly what I need. And so that's where all that kind of clicked for me. And I knew from the speaking coaching that a big part of it, I didn't have a lot of testimonials. I also wasn't really walking the talk, so to speak. I was getting on a podcast, but I wasn't getting on stages in front of people. So therefore I wasn't this walking billboard. And I realized that was the big thing. But when I switched to the virtual assistant agency and started talking about, here's what I've delegated, here's what I've offloaded, all of a sudden people were like, okay, Philip knows what he's talking about. And so that's an important thing. And I'm glad you brought that up and showed that you are that walking billboard. And if you're not doing it, it's hard for people to really trust that you can actually do that. People want to know and want to see that you're where they want to be, kind of a thing, and everything. So that's awesome. And I love the beta group as well. And not that doing for free isn't necessarily a bad thing as well, but I like that you did it at a discounted rate. Such an important thing as well, because yeah, it's tough. I mean, and the ego gets in the way. Obviously we have some kind of time constraints that cost us money and everything. Obviously you're in this full time, so you're also like, I've got to actually make some money to eat and everything as well. But yeah, you can't, let's say 2,000 is your full price. You can't just start at 2,000, but what can you start at to really get people in and figure out what that is, and then slowly increase that price? So really cool thing that you did there. So how did you come up with the whole beta program? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think it's a really safe, maybe approachable way for people who are sort of interested in working with you to commit to it, right? Because they're like, oh, okay, like this is a one-time thing. I do kind of want to work with this person, but I'm going to get it at this great rate. I'm going to get it at half off what they would normally cost. And because you're really talking to those possible clients, digging into their brains, there's so much feedback. They feel ownership in the process, which is really cool too. I mean, that's exactly what you want. You want to hear about all the steps you're taking and how they respond and what worked, what didn't. When people have that ownership, when they really feel like they're part of the team, like of your project, I feel like they get more invested. And so, yeah, like I said, business coach that I had turned me on to the idea. And I was like, this is a perfect way to test out not only your initial offer, but anytime you have a new offer where you're like, I think people might like this, do a beta group, test it out, offer it a discount, get those testimonials, and then you can offer it full price with a whole slew of people who are already singing your praises. And of course you can, switch anything that didn't go well. You can work out all those bugs, which inevitably happen. There's going to always be things you need to improve on before you're giving it to everybody.
Yeah, and to add to that as well, something I did it for free, but like I reached out to a few people that I knew specifically, like, hey, I'm not trying to pitch you here. I mean, I didn't tell them that, but I was just more about like, hey, I want to get a testimonial. I told them up front, like, hey, give me a video that's like 5 minutes or less long. My team will edit it for you. The only thing that I ask is that you give me a video testimonial and a Google review. And it's been awesome to be able to get that. And then some conversations have actually happened because I was literally just trying to get some testimonials and like, hey, why not give them something of value? So we did it for free, but I've already had conversations with several of them like, hey, what's your pricing look like? How does this work? All because of taking that little bit of action. So it's an important thing that we do to really help get that traction. And that's something you could continually do. I think it's a creative way to be able to get more lead flow as well, because you're giving that value and there's that reciprocation that's happening from that. So, I mean, so many things that can help there. But speaking of lead flow, let's get into the podcasting side of things. So tell us a little bit about your podcast, and then I want to dive into more of the depths of the podcast and why it's such a powerful thing for us as business owners.
Sure. So since I started in the podcast coaching space, of course, I was like, I need a podcast about podcast coaching, right? Let's make everything super meta. So last summer, I started Podcast Growth Club. And again, it's my podcast all about podcast coaching. And speaking to the idea you just talked about, when I first started it last summer, I offered free 20-minute live podcast coaching sessions. And again, it's like, there's no cost. I'll give you free coaching with the idea that I'd love to turn our time together into an episode for the show. And it's brilliant, right? Because you are offering something free that people are going to find super helpful, but then you put it on your podcast and then people see you coaching in action. They see you giving that advice, and it really builds that know, like, trust factor. And exactly, in exchange, I was like, hey, can I have a positive review and so on? Or can you give me a testimonial? And like you said, some of those people considered working with me afterwards. That wasn't part of it. I wasn't trying to be salesy, but it's just a natural progression. Anyway, circling back, if you are a business owner, especially if you're in like a coaching space, entrepreneur, speaker, author, writer, anything in that space, it makes 100% sense to have a podcast. Podcasts are a great way to gain trust with your audience and to form a community of super fans, right? If you're a business owner, you're already reaching out to your audience on social media, which takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And maybe the one problem with social media is that people are cruising through it so fast, right? It's like 30 seconds, 10 seconds, they swipe left, they go up, and then you're gone. The magic of a podcast is that they are with you. Once they find you, they are with you for 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And where else do you have a medium where you're like inside the ears of someone? You're talking to them, while they're living their life. And if you give out episodes weekly, if you release weekly, you become part of their life. It's a habit. Like every Wednesday when they're walking their dog, Philip is in their ear, giving them tips about businesses, right? And before you know it, they're like, oh, I feel like I really know Philip and I want to work with Philip. So I would say if you're in this space, it makes total sense. You're already making, content out there. And hey, why not make a podcast? It's a great lead magnet. People find you, they know, like, and trust you. And then all of a sudden, bam, they want to work with you. And also, in addition to that, it's good for your business, but it's also great for networking. And that's one of the additional benefits of podcasting. It's like you get to talk to people you would maybe never talk to in your real life. And it's so fun. You get to learn about their business. They know people. All of a sudden, you have this wide range of people from around the US or wherever you're located where you can connect from. You can give each other's referrals, favors. It's really neat. There's a lot of growth potential in that.
Yeah, completely agree there. I mean, there's so many little facets. I love the networking aspect of it because it's a great way we can have a great conversation, get to know each other. And it's interesting, and I'd love to hear your take on it. There's a difference between hosting a podcast and being a guest on a podcast. And to me, both have their benefits there for sure. And it depends on what you're trying to go for. Are you trying to bring people into your environment that maybe it does lead to sales? And now if you're just trying to pitch them, and I've been on several of those podcasts where you get on, hey, we're going to talk about you and we're going to help educate our audience. And it's basically just them trying to vet you out essentially and asking about your business, how much you make, how many clients you have. And it's like, am I in a sales conversation or am I actually on a podcast? Yeah, there's definitely some shady people out there trying to do that. But then being the guest as well, you essentially get spotlighted. You get to talk about you, your business, and it's just great content out there for people to really get to know you and everything. So it's a really powerful tool. Actually, talk to us a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people, when they think about podcasting, they think, oh, I've got to start a podcast. And I always suggest going and guesting first, being a guest on a couple of podcasts, see if it's a fit for you, because podcasting isn't for everybody. There are millions of podcasts out there, and there still needs to be more. Everybody, at some point, I think should start it. It just depends on where you're at. But talk to us about the difference between hosting and guesting a podcast, and maybe some of the things that you're seeing that, people can avoid the pitfalls of doing either side.
Yeah, definitely. I like the whole idea. Start guesting first. Just dip your toe in the water, see what you think. That being said, guesting is great for networking, right? It's great for expanding your audience, but you're not building that relationship with the audience because you're just there once and then you go, so they don't have a spot to continually return to you to build that relationship. If you are going to go the podcasting route and you are using it to grow grow your business, there's a couple things I want you to do. Number one, I want you to make sure you do solo episodes. I know a lot of business owners who start podcasts and they just interview people. And that's great, right? It's fun. You learn tons, but you're not doing anything to showcase your business. You're not doing anything to show your expertise. So if you want to be looked at as an expert, if you want people to know, like, and trust you, you have to be the main voice. You have to be the one sharing the advice and tips. That's not to say that you can never do guest episodes. I would say 2/3 of the time, do solo episodes, and then maybe once a month, then bring a guest on. But you definitely want to do solo episodes. The other thing I see a lot when people start podcasts as well, they have too many calls to action. So when the show's done, they're like, follow me on Instagram, subscribe to my newsletter, sign up for my course, I've got a free workshop, and you're just going to overwhelm your listener. They're not going to do anything. So really be intentional with your one call to action. What is the one thing that you want them to do that's really going to move your business forward? Usually what I advise clients to do is one of two things. I would say either have them sign up for a newsletter. So you're sending out a weekly newsletter where, again, you're nurturing that audience. You're giving advice, you're giving tips. You're not selling necessarily, but you're becoming a trusted source for them. And then maybe once in a while you have an offer out there. That's really key. The other thing I would say do beside a newsletter is just have them think about signing up for a free discovery call. And again, you can give it a snazzy name, but it's just a low stakes, no cost way for them to interact with you, talk about what's the pain point they have, and see if it makes sense for you two to work together. You know, you don't want to sell a product, you don't want to sell a program. Ratio of people buying from a podcast, from things like that, doesn't work well, but it does work super well to do a discovery call. I do that for my clients, I do it for myself. Works great. And it's amazing. Like every time I stop doing that discovery call to action in my podcast and I switch to something else, I see my discovery calls go away. But when I just have it up and I casually mention it, I was like, oh, magic, look at that. So there's something about that low stakes way of doing it that people really jives with people. Two other tips. I have so many tips, but I would say podcasts do not necessarily have to be video. There's a lot of hype in the podcasting space where it's like, you need to be everywhere. You've got to have YouTube, etc. And I think that really depends on your audience. You know, I'm thinking about your audience, Philip. They're busy entrepreneurs. They're probably, you know, they're wearing a million hats. They've got tons of stuff going on. They may not have time to sit down and watch YouTube, right? So if you look at your podcast analytics, you can see where are most of my listeners listening, right? And for most people, it's 80% or more, they're on a phone, which just shows they're listening in their car, they're popping earbuds in, they're going for a walk. So the video part doesn't matter, because I see people get stuck on that. They're like, oh my gosh, I need to, you know, have a camera and make YouTube, and I've got to hire a video editor. And it's like, not necessarily. You don't have to start with all the bells and whistles. You can start super simply, start small, and don't overthink it. I think so many people go into podfade, they disappear because they try to do everything and then it's too much, right? There's all that overwhelm, there's the burnout, and they never go forward. And podcasting, like entrepreneurship, it's a long game. You've got to stay in it, you know, to win it, to see those results.
Yeah, exactly. I was actually talking to a guy today. He's got a YouTube channel and I was following up with him. We did a whole YouTube video for him. A little upset because, like, you know, it was supposed to be like a 5-minute video, turned into like a 25-minute video, but you know, we committed, so whatever, we move forward with that. But like talking to him about, because he was curious, you know, what would the cost be and everything, and he just wasn't ready for that next step, which is fine. I mean, he's got like 2,500 subscribers on YouTube, so he's doing pretty well. Obviously, from the one video we did for him, he didn't see much of a difference or anything. I mean, there was obviously from the video aspect, yes, but from the viewership perspective, he didn't see much of a difference. His audience didn't really say much about it, so he felt like it wasn't a benefit there. But even for me on my podcast journey, at first I started out just audio, like you were talking about, and then I switched over to video because I wanted to be able to create reels and all that stuff and create other content. Of course, it is on YouTube as well, just so it's there. I'm not necessarily focused on it being super engaging from the podcast video perspective or whatever, but it's just another platform to be able to have that content. But the thing was, I realized I wanted to invest more into it because I knew that I could get more out of that. But at first I started out, I just trimmed the beginning and end. If I knew there was a big like gaping spot in the middle because connection, whatever, I would go and edit that. But other than that, it was basically just soup. It was just the raw thing besides the beginning and end trim. And that's what this guy was saying, like, oh yeah, that investment doesn't make sense to me. And at some point in your journey, it may make sense. It may never make sense. It's fine. You just have to decide for yourself what makes the most sense as far as investing how much time and making the quality what you want it to be. But you're right. It doesn't have to be like we see, like Alex Hormozy is a big name out there, and these other podcasters that have this like just impeccable podcast, and it's on video and it just looks so amazing. And they've got where it's like each individual person's on the screen and it's like right there on them. It's 4K crystal clear. They've spent probably thousands of dollars on that one episode. You don't have to do that. You can literally just trim it and it'll be good. And there's plenty of podcasts that are doing pretty well by only doing that. And at the end of the day, say it's all about the content versus the quality of the video and the audio. Obviously, if it's a podcast, you need to have some decent audio, but it doesn't have to be crystal clear either, as long as the content is there and it's something that people want to listen to.
Yeah, 100%. My buddy Adam, he's been in the podcast space for 8 years maybe, but over 1 million downloads, just has like a regular mic, made over $1 million in his business. And there's no reason to upgrade, like he's a coach giving advice. It's not a storytelling podcast where you really need tons of editing and weave music in and all that. It's like, we just want to have a conversation. It's as simple as that. So it doesn't have to be daunting.
Exactly. Well, before we get to the monetization piece, something that I've been thinking about, this is another cool thing about having people on your podcast. You get to ask them questions on their expertise and they typically answer them. But I've been curious, something I've been thinking about trying out is almost having like a strategy call recorded, because we help business owners get virtual assistants. So my thoughts here is like having a business owner on just to have a casual conversation, not sell them, but help them think through strategically what would be like that next hire, or looking at their business and seeing where they're stuck in their business and what role is the next role that makes the most sense for them to hire out, just based on where they're at. Because I love just having that conversation. I think it's something that could be beneficial, but I'm curious to hear from the expert side. What's your thoughts on having that kind of conversation with somebody on a podcast platform?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant and perfect. I mean, that type of live coaching where people see you in action and they can also put themselves into the shoes of the owner. A lot of them, when they listen, they're probably like, oh yeah, I have that exact same problem, and maybe Philip can help me. I think it's super powerful. I would say 100% do it. That's what I do on podcast audit episodes, where it's like just live coaching, and it's super valuable. It really increases that trust factor for you as an expert. They're like, oh, I like the way he handled that. Because all of a sudden they're like, I do want to work with Philip. He's great. So yeah, I think people don't do that enough. It's awesome.
I like that podcast audit episode, business audit episode. I like that. I need to write that down. But, you mentioned monetization. Obviously, everybody wants to figure out, how do I start making money? So talk to us. Is it the right thing to do? When should we do it? And, how do you go about actually monetizing your podcast?
Good. Okay. There's 2 ways to monetize. There's the traditional way that most people think of, where it's like, I'm going to get sponsors for my show. And I'll address that in a second. And then there's the other way where it's like, I'm going to get clients for my business. For most people, especially entrepreneurs, people listening to this podcast, it's going to make way more sense for you to use your show for that expert positioning to bring clients your way. You're going to make tons more money. The way podcast sponsorship works currently in the podcast industry, for every 1,000 downloads, the industry average pay is about $15. So again, if you're getting 10,000 downloads a month, which most people aren't, and that's totally fine, you're still only making $150 an episode. I don't think it's worth your time to give an ad for Athletic Greens or BetterHelp, whatever the sponsorship might be, Mushroom Coffee. I think it's so much more worth your time to promote what you do, to talk about your services, how people can work with you. Because, for example, I have this in an episode on Podcast Growth Club. I'm pretty sure it's episode 41. It's about how to make your first $1,000 with your podcast. And I talk about expert positioning, doing solo episodes, and then throwing out an anytime offer. So an anytime offer is just you as a coach saying, hey, people can sign up to work with me at any moment. I have a 2-week coaching consulting package where I'm going to get you from A to B. It's just, think about your expertise. Like, what could you help someone do in 2 weeks? And then offer that at a really, very approachable price point. So let's say $500, right? Like, hey, I'm going to help you onboard a virtual assistant and make sure that they're successful and that your business is running seamlessly. I'm going to set that all up. We're going to work together for 2 weeks. I think that would totally be worth $500, right? So you promote that and you kind of just talk about it casually. It's not necessarily like an ad that plays in your podcast, but you have to do it more than once. I would run this idea for 8 weeks, at least 2 months weekly. And then I think by the end of 8 weeks, you're going to start getting people who are interested because you've talked about it. You have content that leads up to it. And before you know it, if you have 2 clients who've signed on for this $500, you've made $1,000 with your podcast. It's way better than people, trying to get sponsorships. Like I said, most podcasters are at the spot where maybe they're getting 50 to 150 downloads an episode, which isn't, it's fine. It's great. You can have a small, loyal, very powerful audience, but you're never going to make money for sponsorships that's going to be meaningful, but you can make a meaningful income with your business. you can really elevate your business. You can get clients, and all of a sudden you can make, $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 on your podcast. And just another little pro tip, especially if you're an entrepreneur with your podcast, get those testimonials if you don't have them. Get them in audio form or video form. Take that testimonial, pop it at the beginning of your episode. So even before, Philip comes on and we're hearing about great tips for business, we hear someone else's voice talking about how fantastic it was to work with Philip and the transformation that happened by working with you, right? And then you dive in and you're giving us great advice. I mean, it's a natural way to do it without being salesy, without, because it's like, I don't like the salesy approach. No one wants to hear anybody try to sell stuff, but we want to know that you can solve our problem and that you're here, you're giving us good value every week on the podcast, you're giving great tips, you're doing business audits, we can see, how you're doing in the coaching space. That's super powerful.
Nice. I like that a lot. And the one question that came to my mind though was that this is great if you got like an online service, but what about for those that, let's say like a plumbing or HVAC company that don't have this online service? How could they leverage a podcast to help them be able to make money off of it because people come in the door, so to speak, to use their services?
Yeah, that is a little trickier because this definitely works better with people who are coaches, entrepreneurs, so on. If you're more of a hands-on tactile industry, which is so important, let me say that is so important. That's different, like I feel like podcasts probably wouldn't be the right space for you. I mean, in that case, maybe it would be a YouTube channel where you're doing some DIY quick fixes and then people talk about how great your service is. So maybe then, but I feel like that would need to be something that's more visual where you're helping them solve a problem. Like here's a quick electrical fix, but in some industries it's not a good match and that's okay.
Yeah. And I love it, that the honesty there. I feel like so many coaches out there, whether it be podcast, whatever it is, they always try to push it like, well, but it's still a good thing to do. Like, oh, but everybody needs a podcast for your case. Like, but you're saying, no, you're a visual type thing. So yeah, go start that YouTube channel. But that's where like, I love to have the video aspect, obviously for me, like I'm virtual and everything. So online space. So I can do the audio version. I try and do video as well, just to have it there, but I like it from the social media perspective to have the video side of the podcast as well, so we can have that content to be able to promote out there. Because again, that's that familiarity like you're talking about. You can hear my voice all the time, but when you actually see me as well, it's a great thing. And obviously then going from social media can put back into the podcast because people can watch the full episode, or they could go sit on YouTube as well and watch that. But I think it's good for all of those aspects. But yeah, I'm trying to think, am I missing anything? I know I've asked a lot of questions around the podcast. Is there anything that I'm missing that we think the audience should know about the significance and importance of the podcast?
Yeah. One thing I hear a lot as a podcast coach and producer, when people first start or they're thinking about launching, they are worried about if the podcasting space is too saturated. And my answer is absolutely not. And here's why. If you look at any industry statistics news, like currently there's around 4 million podcasts out there. And you might be saying, Rayna, whoa, like how can you say it's not saturated and there's 4 million? But in reality, around 10% of those are actually active. So around 400,000 are active podcasts. The rest have started, maybe they have 5 episodes, 10 episodes. Maybe they have 100, but they faded away years ago. You can still find them, but there's no new content being released. So in the podcasting space, there's only 400,000 that are still putting out an episode every 30 days. That's not that much when you compare it to, I'm trying to think of how many YouTube channels there are now. I mean, like, gosh, I don't even know, but it's at least 10 to 20 times more YouTube channels out there. I know a lot of people are like, well, I can make it big in YouTube. And it's like, YouTube's much more saturated than podcasting. And every generation from Gen Z, Gen Alpha, Millennial, Gen X boomers, they are increasing in podcast listenership. So each time data comes out, every generation continues to grow in their podcast listenership. Currently, 1 out of every 2 Americans listens to a podcast regularly, which is huge. Like 3 to 4 years ago, it was just 25%. Yeah, 25% of the population. So podcasting's not going anywhere. People really like listening. They like multitasking. And again, if you're someone who is already making content, getting that know, like, trust factor for your business is something that's really important because you're a coach, a speaker, an entrepreneur, so on, then this might be the avenue for you to go. Again, it's not for everybody. Doesn't make sense for everybody. But if you're in that space, I would say, yeah, this is the great way to do that. And again, you don't need a giant audience. You can have a small, mighty audience that makes a difference in the world. So those are all my pro tips.
Yeah, no, I love it. And one thing that I'll add to that, because I know you mentioned both the guest and solo episodes. I love doing both as well. With this particular podcast, I've had a different podcast in the past where I did actually a solo episode once a week and a guest episode once a week, and now I'm kind of splashing both in. We're not doing just one or the other, but we're doing both. But what I found with the solo episode is that it helps you be able to articulate your thoughts a lot better, because now you're having to break it down. And I guess similar to YouTube, you have a main idea and you've got a couple points to support that, and you talk through those. And so you can actually learn to be a better speaker versus having a guest on. Now you need to learn how to navigate a conversation. You need to learn how to actually interview somebody, listen to what they say, and actually respond to that, maybe giving your input instead of saying, okay, cool, thanks for answering that. Next question. Like, let me ask you the next one. So you get to learn how to be more conversational. To me, that's just another benefit of actually having a podcast. And again, you could do it on YouTube if you really wanted to, whatever. But recording yourself, recording with somebody else, is you can learn how to speak better, also speak and have a conversation. And I found a lot of business owners really struggle to have that conversation and everything, or just even be able to articulate thoughts. And so it allows you in a more safe environment, because you're not in front of hundreds of people, be able to learn how to speak and articulate as well. So just another benefit there and everything.
Yeah, and I wanted to add on too, for all the introverts out there, I'm more introverted than extroverted. Podcasting is such a great space for introverts because you get that kind of one-to-one conversation. It's not like you're on stage in front of 1,000 people and your heart's beating out of control. You're like, oh, I can just have a conversation, and it's very comfortable and very fun, and you definitely become a better speaker. And I forgot to mention this, podcasting brings all of these unexpected opportunities. It's not going to happen your first year, but probably year 2 or year 3, all of a sudden you might get featured in a newspaper article, a magazine. You're going to be invited to speak on TV. All of these things have happened to me. They've happened to my clients. I didn't start my podcast to do that, but it's kind of neat to see where these go and how people seek you out to come speak to them and talk to them.
Yeah, and I love that. And I tell people about that too. Like, it's a great SEO tool, search engine optimization, because, if we go look up your name, we'll probably see a bunch of podcasts you've been on as well. I mean, obviously all the articles you just mentioned, everything, obviously your social media channels, but then we're going to start seeing that. So now you're just populated more and more and more because of that, versus, oh, let me do another website update. Let me put another page, try and get in another article. It's just another way, to me, that's more fun as well, is you're having a real conversation with somebody instead of writing up an article. Maybe you got interviewed and somebody posted as an article. So just more ways to be able to get yourself out there and build up that personal brand recognition and brand recognition for your business too. Well, Rayna, this has been awesome. I've really enjoyed this. As you can tell, everybody, we love podcasting. We think it's a great thing. You need to look into it for yourself. Obviously, you should reach out to Rayna about that. She can answer so many more questions than me. But Rayna, where can people reach out to you, or what's the one call to action you can give to us today? Because, right, you're only supposed to have one call to action. So I feel like I'm going to violate your policy if I ask where they can reach out to you.
That's okay. Please come listen to me on Podcast Growth Club. Check out my podcast. Episode 62 just came out. It's about 5 benchmarks every podcaster should aim for. That's a great one to start with. But yeah, listen, and then if you like it, reach out. I'm on social media. You can find me.
Awesome. Well, love it. Well, Rayna, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing about podcasting, how it can help benefit us on our personal and business side. And I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks. I did too, Philip.